I think we made it feel less intimidating for people because the UX of a terminal, most shell environments haven't changed in 30, 40 years. You install bash, Z shell, fresh install, it's like a dollar symbol. And you're like, what the hell is that?
Hello, welcome to the devtools-fm podcast. This is a podcast about developer tools and the people who make them. I'm Andrew, and this is my co-host, Justin.
Hey, everyone. We're really excited to have Robby Russell on the podcast today. So Robby is the CEO of Planet Argon, and you also are the creator of Oh My ZSH, which I'm really excited to talk about. But before we dive into that, would you like to tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I run the CEO of Planet Argon, which is a web development software consultancy. We help companies primarily with Ruby on Rails help make their applications better and more maintainable. I also am the host of the Maintainable software podcast. But yeah, I've been a software engineer for, 25 years or give or take now. And yeah, I'm happy to chat with you folks.
Yeah, so I found it fun. I was looking into your background. I love to see when people are both like high school dropouts and then they got directly into coding. So can you tell us like how you got into coding and how you got into like the space you are today?
Sure, it's a long, convoluted story. The short version is I, as a kid, I always grew up with computers. I'm from California, the Bay Area originally, and my dad worked and just recently retired in Silicon Valley. And he worked in hardware, and he always encouraged me to get into software. And I actually thought that sounded like the most boring thing I could possibly do as a career. So I rebelled and decided I'm never going to do that. I do not want to work in computers. That's how I used to talk about it back then. And this is the mid 90s. But I also wanted to sell stickers, and I had a mail order sticker business, and I used to do this for like punk bands, things like that, and political stickers. And people would literally send me a few dollar bills in the mail, and I would then send them a couple of stickers back in the mail, charge $1 a sticker. And I wanted to put that on the internet. So when I finally started getting into doing some coding to do something more dynamic, like more than just having, say, a web page, it was how do I make a web page that could allow people to fill out a form, request some things. We didn't do like credit card processing or anything like that at the time, but at least it would save some data to a text file on the server, and then I would SSH, or not SSH, but FTP into a computer server somewhere and check to see if anyone placed any orders. Usually not. Pull down a text file or a CSV file. But it would also do things like send an email saying, here's Robby's information, here's how to send him, here's where to send your dollars in the mail, and then he'll send you some stickers. So that was like the first building blocks of like, I had a very specific thing that I wanted to do. And I was like, how do I make that happen? So I just looked online, and this is like online back then, but like finding Perl scripts. And I also used some other things like Microsoft Front Page at one point and other tools that existed way back in the mid to late 90s. But that kind of but I had all these different types of projects. Like I also had like an online zine for punk music, and I wanted to put that on the internet because it was a paper zine. So I was always trying to figure out, how do I replicate this stuff on the internet? How do I build community type things on the internet? And so I just kind of like picked up on these little skills over several years. This is maybe 6, 7 years before I ever got paid to actually work on someone else's software project on the web. And then at some point, it was a lot of those projects were like finding other like open source projects or example code that you can copy and paste, modify it. And that's how I learned to kind of do a lot of those fundamental programming skills I kind of built up in that sort of fashion. And then eventually I bought myself how to build a MySQL database. So I bought like a MySQL database book. So I taught myself SQL. I tried doing some stuff with Access as well. And I also, because I was always trying to figure out how to do stuff with the Microsoft stuff and do stuff with open source technology in parallel. But those first several years was just kind of like building up all these little things. And then eventually I got a job working at a company doing like tech support. And then I started automating some stuff and put together a company intranet using an open source PHP framework. And then I started building some little PHP tools for the intranet. And then another department at the company that I worked at, this was back in 2000, they noticed that I was doing some web stuff. And they're like, hey, we actually have a whole department where we have programmers that do that. That should be us doing that. Why are you doing it? And they're like, do you want to come work with us? And then you can do that stuff as well. And so then I learned, I had some people that I got that were basically, I was kind of, I guess I was a junior developer, and they were like, come over here and work with like the web team. And then I started actually like learning more things from my coworkers. They were teaching me things, and they were a ASP Microsoft shop. And so I was being taught like, okay, here's how to do stuff in ASP. Here's Microsoft SQL Server, store procedures, yada, yada, yada. And then I would go home and like, how do I translate what I learned at work today with PHP and MySQL? Because I was really excited about open source stuff. And those building blocks just kept building up over several years. And eventually I was like, I think people might pay me to do this for their projects. And I don't need a Microsoft license because I can use this open source stuff. So let's see where that goes. And that's when I started Planet Argon in 2002 as like a freelancing thing to do on the side. And it took me a couple of years before I was able to quit my job and do that full time and become an agency.
So that's an awesome story. I feel like starting an agency early in your career, especially, is like I mean, I guess it was a consultancy before it was an agency, but like starting that early in your career is a big step, even if you're kind of like moonlighting doing it. How were the early years? And then how have you been able to make it sustainable over time?
The fun thing was that in 2004 is when I quit my last job to do Planet Argon full time. And it was me and a designer, and we were working together on a bunch of projects. She had her own web design business and I did the development stuff. So we collaborated a lot. And so I quit my last job because I was thought that like, oh, I'll just work for myself part-time and then I'd focus on music, which is actually the thing that I would have loved to have become like a professional musician one day. Sidebar for that for maybe another time. But I started to actually, so the funny thing is like I was doing freelance stuff. And then in late 2004, I applied for a job on Craigslist for a PHP job here in Portland, Oregon for a company called CD Baby. I don't know if you've ever heard of CD Baby, but they use, one of you shaking your head like I have no idea. The other one's like, yeah, of course. CD Baby was the largest online record shop on the planet for independent musicians. And like you would literally they basically, if you were an independent band, you would ship them a small box of CDs, they would manage inventory and they would ship it out to people. So they would manage all the fulfillment. And this is back, like the early 2000s. So I was potentially going to get hired to work on this, to be a PHP developer there. The owner of that company, his name's Derek Sievers, kind of well-known person in the tech world to some degree, maybe less so these days, but he offered me a job verbally and then said, great, we'll sign you. So I thought I was actually going to get a job again. And I was going to work at this local music company and like meld my open source love, PHP stuff with working with a music company here in town. And as I was also a musician, so I'm like, this is a great opportunity. He came back from a winter holiday break and said, hey, I got stuck in a blizzard and I started teaching myself Ruby. I had this Ruby programming book and I want to rewrite everything in this new thing called Ruby on Rails. And I was like, oh, okay. So he's like, so I'm going to rescind that job offer, but if you can pick it up, I will hire you in a few months. I found this other guy that lives in San Diego and I'm going to move him to Portland and he's going to come help me start rewriting everything in Rails. I was like, oh, okay. That was not exactly how I thought that was going to go, but I used that as a motivator, but like, I guess I should play around with this Ruby on Rails thing more. I had seen a video about a month before created by DHH about how to build a blog in 10, 15 minutes or whatever. So I started learning Ruby on Rails, teaching myself it, and became an early adopter of that. And I started a blog called Robby on Rails. And then all of a sudden my life changed. I went from, so when you come back to the original question of like, how did you go from an agency thing? It was like, I was doing this work for myself and I tried to get another job, started doing Ruby on Rails. And then within a few months, people started reaching out to me like, hey, will you help me with this? Because I started blogging very actively. This is probably the most prolific blogger in the Ruby on Rails community that year in terms of volume. And I had all these projects starting to come my way. So I was doing a bunch of I was like, oh, this is interesting. So when Derek from CD Baby reached out to me like 6 months later, like, hey, I saw you're learning Rails. Do you want to come work for me? And I was like, I have too much work now as a freelancer. I'm going to see where this goes. And I started getting calls from pretty large companies down in Silicon Valley, like, hey, will you come interview us? Some of them are still really, really big name companies. I didn't really take them that seriously. I also didn't want to work on a cubicle in Silicon Valley. And that was like a thing that I was really trying to avoid as this DIY anarcho punk kid that lived in Portland. And so I found myself taking all these projects were coming and it was like, what do I do? Like, some of these projects started to get too big for me just to work on it by myself with my designer. But I would go to the local Ruby meetups and I knew a bunch of people that love working with Ruby and that was like their fun hobby project thing to work with, but nobody was hiring Ruby developers. And so I was like, what if I just hire these people to come, hey, want to come work with me and we'll see where this goes. So that was basically the decision was I got a really large project that popped up. It was for a new startup, and then another one popped up really quickly for this other company called Nike that wanted to do something for this big project in 2006, and they wanted to use Rails. And I was like, well, what the hell? I guess I might as well give this a go. Let's see what happens. Worst thing, I just go back to being an independent freelancer if this blows up. So kind of just took the chance, and we said, okay, hired 8 people to work on these projects like almost overnight, and then that's just we've been this company doing that ever since. So yeah, it was not what I set out to do. It was very much opportunity driven, right place, right time, and being ignorant enough to say, like, what's the worst that could possibly happen? You could lose a lot of sleep is like the moral of that story, running a company. But yeah, I've been able to keep doing that since then.
I think another good takeaway from that is that learn in public is just so valuable in so many different ways. Like if you hadn't been a prolific blogger, just like blogging your experiences about Ruby, you probably would have never led to those things.
No, probably not.
We'd like to thank our sponsor for the week, Clerk. Clerk is an all-in-one user management platform that makes adding authentication to your app a breeze. Whether it's as high level as adding some components to your app to support login, or if you want to get in the nitty-gritty of it, build it all out on your own using their SDKs. They got your back. With Auth, there's so many different ways you could log in. Literally, new ways are introduced every year. This year we got passkeys. With Clerk, you don't have to worry about any of the details of those things. You just log into your account and activate the things that you want to use. Personally, I've used it at Google Auth, Facebook, Spotify, so many different things, and it's all just so simple. But the best part about Clerk is their awesome free tier. With their free tier, you get 10,000 monthly active users. And they also have this awesome program where if your app pops off and a bunch of people use it for just one day and never log on again, you don't pay for those users because they're not really your users. I think that's really cool. It also just doesn't stop at login. You get a bunch of things like user pages and other user management things. If you want to learn more about Clerk, head over to clerk.com. Or if you want to get a better view of the product or the company, go head over to the episode where we interview co-founder Braden. We talk about where the product's been and where they plan to take it, like adding Stripe. Are you tired of hearing these ads? Become a member on one of the various channels that we offer it. There you'll get the episodes ad-free and a little bit earlier. If you want to find another way to support the podcast, head over to shop.devtools.fm. There you can buy a hat and help us keep going a little bit longer. And with that, let's get back to the episode.
So let's switch gears a little bit and start talking about Oh My ZSH. So for people who don't know what Oh My ZSH is, let's set the stage a little bit. What is Oh My ZSH?
Well, I like to think of it as a playground. Yeah, it's a playground for your terminal, I suppose. A kind of a simple way of is like, basically, if anyone's familiar, assuming most people listening are familiar with terminals, it's a framework for managing your Z shell configuration, and it comes bundled with hundreds of plugins and themes, probably too many, but it does. And it created that nearly 15 years ago and first released it, and has had contributions from, nearly 2,400 developers have code contributed to the project. Again, it's kind of a big playground, and yeah, it's kind of like what it is. If you're curious about how it started, it was because my coworkers were still. I had started using Z Shell about 2 years before I released Oh My Z Shell, or even thought to create the thing. But it was basically a combination of a bunch of little snippets and code sharing things that like peers we've been sharing on different. We used to have these websites, kind of like a GitHub gist, but called Pasty back in the day, and like other places. We used to share things over IRC channels. We'd be like, here's how to do this, and here's how to get some autocomplete functionality for this stuff. And so for about 2 years, I was just like really enamored with Z Shell itself, and gave me a lot of cool autocomplete stuff. And then Git was this new thing at the time as well, and so I was able to make my prompt have like my local Git branch, and local branches were kind of a new concept at the time. And just like those types of things. It also had like some auto completion stuff for over SSH and SCP, which was another kind of really useful thing because I used to manage a lot of servers. Part of our business used to also be hosting servers and stuff like that. But so I kind of combined up, built up all these things, and I had built up a huge reliance on a lot of the aliases and shortcuts, like muscle memory. And so I would be pair programming with my coworkers, and I'd be at their computer, and I'd be like, what's the thing? And I remember like in my brain, it's like 3 characters, does this weird Git, archaic Git commit or Git command. And so we're constantly looking at like the manual, Git manual and stuff like that. And I'm like, how do you do that? And I'm like playing with the syntax. And I'm like, and I remember one day talking to one of my coworkers, his name was Carlos, and I was like, hey, why don't you just use Z shell? And then like, here's my config file. And then like, it'd make my life easier when I'm helping you selfishly. And then he was like, I don't know, like, I don't really understand what your Z shell configuration does. And I was like, And admittedly, I probably only understood about 40% of it too. Because I had copied and pasted and shared things with a bunch of peers, and IRC channels and stuff like that. And so I didn't think like me trying to walk him through the config file was going to be all that productive. So after battling this kind of problem, a couple of other of my coworkers did start using my Z shell configuration. Oh My Z shell was not a thing, but it was just, so one weekend I decided I was going to document my config file. And I was like, I'm just going to add some notes, comments, explain what things do. And I'm going to kind of try to make sense of it. So I was like pulling up the Z shell configuration or the Z shell website for their documentation, trying to make sense of what I was actually working on. And I started reorganizing things. And I'm like, I should probably put this in a repository and do some version tracking in case I mess it up or people want to make changes to my coworkers. So I was like, I guess I'll put it in a repository. And I just named it Oh My Z shell. I took this really, really large file and broke it up into several smaller, slightly less messy files, threw it in a repository, called it Oh My Z shell. About a month before, I had worked on a project with another coworker called Oh My Science. I just kind of repurposed the name and threw Z shell because I'm like, it's my Z shell configuration. Put together a README, like here's how to install it. I shared that with the team on Monday in our whatever, I forget what tool we use, Campfire or whatever chat tool we had at the time, and everybody installed it. And I won. Victory. So that's how OMG first started. I literally just wanted my coworkers to have all of my shortcuts because I had all this muscle memory. And then the next day, one of them asked, how do I change the colors? And I was like, why would you want to do that? And they're like, well, I want to change the colors. And so I was like, well, okay. So I showed them, here's the file in the repository you can change, like change this to your heart's content. And then in parallel, other coworkers wanted to start adding their own aliases for things like, oh, I do this, and this is cool. And here's some other little shortcuts we want to do. So they started contributing some ideas. But then that one coworker, Gary, who wanted to change colors, had a problem because he couldn't do a git pull and git push cleanly because he had made changes locally. And so he was like, how do I manage my changes? I'm like, well, this is kind of messy. What do we do? And so I sat there thinking, and I was like, oh, this is kind of like a theme, maybe. So I created a directory called themes. I took my file, my version, and called it Robby Russell. And then there was a Gary Blessington one. And I made a configuration. Mine's the default. And if you want to use a different one, you can toss it in that directory and call it whatever you want. That's how themes were created. So it wasn't something I thought of. And then I shared this on my blog and other people started contributing. About a month and a half or so later, some developer reached out and said, hey, I noticed I'm really liking the tool, but I noticed that it assumes that you're a Ruby on Rails developer, but I'm a Python developer. How do I get rid of all this Ruby stuff? And I want to add some Python stuff. And I was like, oh, that's a good question. I guess I can just move all this stuff into some plugins. We'll call these plugins, and you can have like your Django or Python one, and I'm going to move all the Ruby stuff into a Ruby one, and then we'll just kind of clean it up that way. So that's how plugins came about. So Oh My Z shell, all the things people know about it, it comes with all these plugins and themes, were not an idea that I had when I first created it. I literally just wanted a few of my coworkers to have my configuration file, all my shortcuts, and then it became this playground as people started to contribute and share their own ideas. And that's how it's evolved and continues to evolve to this very day.
It's really funny how it started as, oh, I don't trust this configuration file. And then you added a little bit of abstraction on top and they're like, oh, a tool I can install. I'll install that.
Exactly.
This is such a classic story for a lot of like unintentional large open source projects. It's like, I had this idea one day to throw together the script. People like that. And then they ask for this other thing. And then months later you have this, huge sprawling thing. Oh My ZSH is actually really cool because for me, this discovering your tool was actually the start of my terminal, crafting journey.
Me too.
Yeah. So I was got into Z shell. And then the first thing I did is okay, I need to install something. I need to like change things, and then discovered your tool, and it's really like taken off from there. But it's yeah, phenomenal work, and it has a huge legacy now. I think of just engineers customizing their workspace.
He's a trendsetter, and I didn't even realize it.
I find it funny that all of these like first names are still in the themes file. Like Gary's still there, still kicking after 15 years.
Yeah. I was giving a talk on this recently at a conference, and I was doing some research on back on like some of the early things that I couldn't remember which coworker it was that asked for the color change. And then I thought it was Carlos, but it actually was Gary. And I was able to look at the Git history and find that out. And then I was asking him, and I went and looked at his version. I'm like, it's not all that different. He's like, yeah, I can't stand your color. He's still to this very day. He's like, I hate your color choices. And I'm like, it's like one of the most common prompts that a lot of developers use now. And it's little did you know. So I'm right. I think I'm still right. So anyhow, I think my prompt is beautiful.
And you can now prove to him that yours is better through usage statistics.
But it was the default, so people didn't choose it. I mean, they did and they didn't.
So how has the project grown and developed since then? Was there any like point in the early life where it really, really took off? I mean, I know you talked about like writing the blog post and getting people like seeing it and giving feedback, but was there like a moment in time where you're like, oh crap, like this is big?
Yeah, there's a couple points I often reflect on. I mean, I mentioned my blog earlier, and I was thinking like, what are some of the theories about why I think it's what's contributed or led to the growth of the project and how it's become one of the most, I'm going to air quoting for those who are not visually seeing this right now, how popular of a project it is. It's one of the most starred projects on GitHub and has been since like the early days of GitHub. So I think one, it was good timing. Oh My ZSH, I released it, kind of just caught the wave as both Git and GitHub were just kind of, the software community was kind of wrapping their head around it. And so GitHub showing like popular projects and us popping up, I think it just made people more curious, like, what is that thing? And then it also kind of, I mentioned that it had like your local branches. That was like another just kind of like weird thing. I think just like it was useful in that sense. And it was really, so another thing was also, it was really easy to try. Like within the 30 seconds, anyone pretty much could like be using it because everybody's computer running on Mac or Linux probably already had Z Shell installed. So you didn't have to do that. People have, I think people sometimes ask like, oh, why weren't you using Fish? I think Fish was only around for a couple of years at the time. I don't think I even heard of Fish for a couple of years after I first created Oh My ZSH. I've still only played with Fish for maybe like 15 minutes. And I'm like, yeah, this is interesting, but I'm not out of a loyalty thing to Oh My ZSH or anything. It's just more of like, it does what I need to do. And I'd probably spend a lot less time in the terminal nowadays than I did 15 years ago. But as far as like these inflection points, I remember I was on the Changelog podcast. I got invited on the Changelog podcast, and this was 2011. And at the time, I remember thinking like, oh, wow, like Changelog, they want to have me on to talk about this. And I had been battling to keep the number of open pull requests under 100, which is 100 open pull requests to keep updated on. Like it was just so many people were contributing things. And I was like, this is so much for myself to navigate. No, it's funny. I think now it's hard for us to keep under like 300 open pull requests on a regular basis. So let's put that aside. But I think it was always like this interesting, there'd be these waves of like all of a sudden a bunch of activity would pop up every few months. And I was like, what happened? And like, did someone blog about it? Like what happened? Because I wasn't like actively promoting it that much outside of just being playful on social media and occasionally blogging about, some new updates or something. But I would often hear that like the stories I would hear would be like, oh, like a coding boot camp, like they basically asked all of their students to install it on day one. That would be like just part of like the setup process. Or someone would be at a conference and someone would be giving a talk and a demo of something, and they were using Oh My ZSH, but then they didn't talk about it. They just were using it. And someone during the Q&A session would raise their hand and be like, hey, what's that? What's that thing you were using? How did you make your terminal look like that? And they're like, oh, I use Oh My ZSH. And then all of a sudden, like hundreds of people would be like, what's that? And so those stories kept popping up. And it was people outside of the Ruby on Rails community, because that's the community that I was a part of and still largely a part of. So it was like, it kind of spread out into this like over and over and over. And it's such a weird thing to be like, how did you even hear about this thing? And, it's like my little small little, Ruby on Rails was like a pretty popular thing at that point in time. And like my blog was popular within that community. So it was easy to get some usage in that community and broadcast it there. But to have it evolve in these other communities I had nothing to do with whatsoever, that was something I don't really know how to reverse engineer that outside of being like, this is the stuff that I heard about after the fact. Like, oh, I heard about it here. And, just before you were mentioning like how as a junior developer, you're learning how to, your first experience of the terminal. I hear this story over and over and over. That's like, oh, it was you. I kind of attribute to this. Like, I think we made it feel less intimidating for people because the UX of a terminal, most shell environments haven't changed in 30, 40 years. You install bash, Z shell, fresh install, it's like a dollar symbol. And you're like, what the hell is that? Like, what do I do? How do I not break my computer? I can click around and like, it'll prompt me to do things. And it's like, are you sure you want to do this? But a terminal, you're like, someone just said RF. Like, what does that mean? Remove like dash RF. Like, I don't know. I'm going to break everything. And which is also a challenge that, it comes to running a project like this, and we can dig into that, but it's just like the UX never really changed. It still hasn't. Like, it's like your first version. Like, if you ever think back to, if you used DOS back in the day, it's still, you're like, what do I do? Like, it doesn't really like guide you. It doesn't give you much feedback necessarily, just if it was a successful command or not. And so I think inadvertently, Oh My ZSH took all these kind of like nice little things, baked it in, and then people just felt like they have some sense of control over an environment they might otherwise feel intimidated by, and then immediately maybe feel like a little bit of like kind of a badass because now they feel like, hey, I'm. It's like it's not like in the Hackers movie exactly, but look how cool my environment looks like. I'm getting validated as a real programmer.
The colors are really inviting. Like every time I get on with a junior developer and I see their terminal and it is just that blank dollar sign, I'm like, how do you live like this? And I install it for them. But all of those little paper cuts, they really add up and they make the terminal such a more inviting place when you have just this like visual feedback instead of like staring back into the past, into what we're emulating, instead of like making it a good thing.
Another thing that I believe helped the project, which was a contentious thing for some people, but it has an auto updater built into it, and which might not seem like that novel of a thing, but I'm going to pat myself on my back a little bit. It was kind of new for terminal stuff back then when I first did it. I thought that people would install, I'm air quoting install, which basically just taking this config file and directory of a bunch of config files. They'd put it on their computer and then they would never update it because you'd have to remember to go run a manual update or something. And then you'd have to go pay attention to a project. And if you're not spending all that much time tracking a change log on some open source project, you're not going to think to go update it and get all in new updates. So if you want performance updates, new plugins, improving things like adding new aliases, I actually thought that would, because I was actually witnessing that with my coworkers, because I'd be like, oh, I fixed that. And they're like, oh, well, I'm like, did you run the git pull yet? And they're like, no. And I was like, well, so even using them as like my little test bed, we'd like someone would be like, hey, this thing's really weird or it's kind of broken in some situations. I'd fix it. I'm like, oh, you have to manually run this thing. And I was like, how can I simplify this? And so I built a wrapper because it just uses Git under the hood. It's basically all the updates are managed via, it does a Git clone and then it does Git pull from, the main branch, every so often. So I built a wrapper that just prompts users at the time, every few weeks I ask users, do you want to check for new updates? And it just does a Git pull. And then we make the format of that information look kind of useful and pretty as well. And that might not seem like that big of a deal, but what it also does, for people that are learning how to use Git already, it's like already kind of using the same sort of tooling and it's the same sort of a user experience you have when you're working on collaborating with other people like your coworkers or your classmates on a Git project. It's the same sort of experience. We have added a couple little extra UX things since then, but that part was there. And so you would see files change. You'd be like, so I think having that show up in your terminal and seeing that, oh, there's new plugins. I can see that's a plugin because it says it's XYZ.plugin. Like, what is that? And I think that would make people more curious to go check out new plugins, or there's a new theme that they can try. And then it would also have an opportunity to show my amazing ASCII art skills and then pitch that you can go buy stickers and t-shirts from us. But I think that just kind of reinforced that there's this kind of like community that are constantly contributing things to that. And so when you got a couple thousand people contributing code, that usually has updates every few weeks. And so you're like, oh, there's this things are happening and I'm part of this community in a way. So I think that was another key thing to the success. Some people hate that. We had to add the ability to disable that. But for the most part, I think I like it. And I think it also contributes to just feeling like you're part of something a bit more than just by yourself.
Yeah, it's a fantastic feature. And now all of the CLI tools that I really really enjoy, like things that I feel like I can't live without,
Like what?
have that same sort of feature. So have you heard of Etuin? I think I'm saying that correct. It's a history plugin. Yeah, it just like gives you a good like history. Anyway, fantastic. And it does that, like let you know when there's an update available, but it does it very unobtrusively. So it's like you continue to use the tool and like kind of lets you know, like Dino CLI, just, I don't know, a lot of the tools that I use these days, like do a good job of just saying, hey, like giving a nudge,
Yeah.
not even like trying to like really, like force it. I want to sort of ask a question related to kind of one of the things you said there at the end. The terminal is an interesting thing because like software developers tend to be very, very, very opinionated about their terminal environments, almost like more so than, the other parts of their, setup. At least it's been my experience. And people can be very loyal to their tools and stuff. So I'm curious if there were any other like maybe unexpectedly challenging things that you had to solve for, like oh, people really hate this update thing, but why? It's like, what were the other hard parts of like building something for the terminal?
A couple things that come to mind. There was a fork of Oh My ZSH at one point, and it's called Presto. And there was a time when we were trying to there was concern that we were basically overloaded with too many plugins and themes. And I have varying contradictory thoughts in my head about whether that was a good idea or not to accept so many things into this playground. And at the time, someone had proposed an idea for coming up with a plugin management system that would rely on, if anyone's familiar with Git submodules, was going to be the tooling choice for that. And this was maybe 2000, what year, a couple years into the project. And so we were going down this path, testing things out, and we were going to basically move plugins to this sort of different, basically continue using Git. But if any fast forwarding now, I don't know that many people that actually like using Git submodules. It was very, very complicated. And so that became a decisive point where I basically, after months of us testing and going, and me being like, yeah, I'm into this idea, and eventually me going, this is too complicated for me to wrap my head around. I'm not enjoying this. And I just don't think my front end developers on my team, junior developers that we're bringing in, are going to understand how to use this. And they're going to have to be like, what am I typing? And that was a key point to be like, oh, who's our core audience? Who's our core target user base? I'm like, you're savvy enough to know how to use that. That's great. I'm barely savvy enough to understand this. So killed it. It's like, no, thank you. We're not going to do this. We're going to focus on making this optimized for, let's say junior developers are our core target user base. And people can graduate or upgrade out of Oh My ZSH at some point. You can use it for now, get you to where you need to go. And once you want to get more advanced, there's lots of other tooling out there. So that became our core focus. I find years later that people still love using Oh My ZSH, even though they've been using it forever. They're like, oh, I love the defaults. I have a couple plugins I use. It does what I need. Problem solved. And these are really, really smart people that know how to do this. And they could go do that stuff. And they're like, no, I don't want to think about it. So there's that part of it. I think a lot of CLI tools can get really complicated really quickly. And so back to that kind of just like, say, developer ergonomics and how easy it is for people to kind of get on board. I don't want to assume everybody who uses Oh My ZSH wants to become a power CLI user. They want to be proficient enough not to break things, get their job done, and sleep at night. And the challenging thing about the terminal, the shell environment, is that because a lot of people aren't familiar with it when they start using it, and even those that are fairly well, like have some experience as software engineers, CLI is not an environment that we tend to do a lot of version control over how things change in your environment. The tools we use, yes, but what we do to our own environment when you open up a terminal and you start copying and pasting things or making changes, because it's kind of like you're interacting with this thing, you're copying and pasting things off of Stack Overflow or your internal team documentation, and then you find out, so a challenging thing with building a tool is that you've got different operating systems, you've got different terminals, uh, different terminal apps, and then everybody's environment is just a little unreliable and inconsistent. They'll open up a new tab in their terminal app and it works. What was the difference? There's not an easy way to track what. It's hard to go back and reverse engine or repeat those steps. So it's hard for us to replicate some bugs from people. This is just, I think, a challenge when you're pair programming with your coworkers or helping debug things. If you're trying to set up your local, your team's web app on a new person's computer and it works for everybody else, but they got a new Apple computer and it's got an M2 chip, all of a sudden, a third of the things don't seem to work right. And so you're copy and pasting commands that don't work. And so because of the chips are different architecture and the person on Linux doesn't work, so the people using things in Docker, and you got all these different shell environments, that's complicated, and it's really difficult to explain that to people that don't have a lot of experience. How do you and then the other thing would be the security of people's environments is another thing. And so we have to be very mindful about how when people report bugs and they ask them to share some of their environmental information and that they're not copy pasting their AWS CLI, environment variables, because it's just, they type in env and they somehow loaded that stuff up already. So a lot of messy stuff like that comes up in this environment. So those are things that are challenging, and we have to spend some time thinking about how we collect data reports. We have tooling that we've built so that people can submit bug reports to a separate service so we can scan out that kind of stuff and then hopefully do a better job of protecting that. But it's a little messy.
Yeah, terminal environments can be humbling. I'm pretty well into my career, but sometimes somebody will approach me with oh, Node's not working quite right. And I'm like, oh no. Just peeling back the layers of all the things that could go wrong is so hard to do.
What version of Node? And which version does what app that you're working on require? And then you add in having multiple versions of Node on your computer or multiple versions of Ruby on your computer. And you're just how do you, it worked over here, it worked yesterday. So that stuff happens a lot. So that is a challenging thing to provide support for that sort of stuff. And just, it's not a very controllable environment where the tools you're using change their paths 1 year and then all the documentation's outdated. And so things that worked 3 years ago, copy and paste them, it doesn't work anymore. And a lot of people don't even know what they copy and paste and remember that they copied and pasted that. And you're what did you do? And they'll remember a third of the steps, the things that they did. They don't know what they tried. And how did you get there? They're I have no idea. And you're well, it changed. Those are just fun pair programming challenges you have with anyone. And I've seen that across all skill levels. It's not specifically just junior developers. That's not, anyone has these problems. I have these problems.
So you mentioned it a little bit, and we've touched on it a lot here on the show, but you guys accept a lot of contributions, and there is some peril in that. I have managed my own open source projects, and at the start I was gung ho. Everybody who makes a pull request, I'll work with you to get that pull request merged. But then I kind of crested the mountain, and I was oh wow, that code is my code now, and I have to think about it. So how do you think about it with such a, as you said, a large project? It has so many contributors, so many plugins. How do you grapple with that?
Well, I am not the first line of defense these days when it comes to reviewing PRs. So there's a couple other people on the team that do a lot more of that. But once we made that decision to, let's take a step back. For several years, I struggled to bring someone else onto the project to help manage the project from there's people that were helping test things and stuff like that, but to actually give them permission, grant them access to actually merge things into the primary branch of the project. Why? Maybe a little bit of a security fear. All these people install this thing and everybody's nervous about it. And if I just worried that one day I'm going to end up oh no, I merged something and it just wiped out hundreds of thousands or I don't even know, millions of people's computers because I overlooked something, because everybody just runs the auto update. So it could be like the thing that bites me in the ass one day. So I'm like, one day I'm going to have to just run away from the internet and never come back because I messed up, or I did it. And because I was like, I'm done. Goodbye, everybody. I'm taking all your computers with me. It's going to happen on April 17th, 2026. I warned you. Anyways, no, but I wasn't, as I created the project, I actually see myself, my role as more of a curator. And I think that I created the initial thing, but even like that initial version was like curating a bunch of ideas from other peers. So it was kind of like what resonated with me. What was I looking for? How did I want my experience to feel? So as people started contributing, yeah, I was taking things that I wasn't like, there's a lot of plugins I've never used outside of testing them, or not even to that extent, because I'm not going to install Symfony, whatever, X number to test this one thing. I'm like, I trusted this person, did their testing. Some other people voted it up and said, yeah, this is going to work. So I think it's a matter of like, does it look and feel like it's something that belongs as part of the overall ecosystem for other like-minded people? And so learning to trust my sense of taste, I think, became important. And the other part of like me bringing other people into the project was like, how do I share not necessarily the permission from a security thing, but how do I share that curator role? How other people come in and make decisions that hopefully 80-90% of the time I also align with how I see the world. So I feel like that was a really hard thing for me to do. And it was, so as so many contributions were coming in, like there was one person named Mark Cornella who I was getting backlogged on keeping up with him. It was just too much, honestly. And I never felt like Oh My ZSH was this mission critical thing where, like, unless there was like a huge security thing or a major bug, I always felt like it was always kind of like done, in the sense that because it's open source, it was feature complete day one. Someone wanted to add a theme. Someone wanted to add some plugins. Anyone that was savvy enough to fork the project and create a plugin already had that plugin. So I wasn't keeping them from it. It was just keeping other people from also using it, unless they were savvy enough to figure out how to pull in that PR into their own version. So if they were savvy enough to figure that out, then they could use it as well. Because there were people that were testing out people's plugins and saying, yeah, this works for me as well. So I knew that people were using those things. And so I never felt like, well, just because that PR has not been merged yet, I'm keeping everybody, everybody's being held back. It was more like, well, I'll get to it when I get to it. And anyone that really wants to use it, that's looking around, can find it. The thing that I felt bad about was when people would start submitting plugin ideas that were very much similar to someone else's, and they didn't see the other one. And I'm like, oh, they just spent time building the same thing, replicating something. And so that's when I started to feel like, okay, this is not ideal. And like, how do I navigate that? So if, I don't want people to waste their time. So all that to say is that once I was able to find Mark Cornella was the first maintainer that I added to the project, because he would start going through and like testing 30 like similar PRs and submitting another PR and saying, I tested all 30 of these are all working. I'm giving the thumbs up. If you merge this one PR, it'll merge all 30 of those PRs. And he would email me like, hey, Robby, just want to let you know of this thing I did. And he found all these workarounds to get my attention. So it made it easy for me to be like, review, merge, thumbs up, done. And then it was like a 30x myself as a maintainer because Mark was doing all the work. And so after he did that several times over maybe a year and a half, 2 years or so, I was like, hey, come on, I'm just going to give you access. Let's do this. Let's just make it easy for junior developers. Let's keep that the focus. And so we agreed on that. And so he's been able to continue doing a lot of that since then as well. And so I can kind of dip in every once in a while. That way I never feel like I'm getting burned out of the project. So I can go jump around and play in the project when I want to, merge things. I usually will start off with like more recent things because they're easiest to merge. And so I feel like it can be helpful. And then I will also do other things like jump in on PRs for first time contributors and like thank them or send them an email, let them know that I appreciate it. Try to do a little bit of that other, reach out. When you have thousands of people doing this, like want to be highly attentive to people as best we can. But we had our maintainer meeting. We do this once a month. There's also another developer named Carlo that's on the project. We talked today, And we've all maybe done a few PRs in the last month since we all last met together. We had to meet in person for the first time together last month at a conference after been working. Mark and I have been working together for 10 years, and it was the first time we ever met in person. And that was pretty exciting to meet. He lives in Barcelona. So does Carlo, but we all met up in Berlin to speak because I was speaking at a conference. And so got us all there together, and then we got to host like an open source booth and like got to meet a bunch of people that use Oh My ZSH, and that was super exciting. But yeah, it's just like I don't know if I quite answered your question at the beginning there, but yeah, it's part of the open source thing.
So of the plugins that you've reviewed and things that like people have submitted, what do you think is like one of the most creative plugins that you've seen?
I think everybody likes to talk about, and I've used it as well. There's one called the fuck. You can go look it up, but it's helpful. Ones I use the most are like .env. Z is another one I use, which kind of builds up a memory of a knowledge base of like where I often navigate on different directories and stuff like that, just to kind of like simplify things like that. There's some other things for like SSH agents that is helpful because I navigate through a lot of different SSH agent profiles and AWS environments for different clients because I work in client services. And so navigate a lot of stuff like that. And there's some other custom ones that my team has built as well that are more interesting for us. But that's another thing people ask, like, oh, how can I contribute to the project? Or what are some ways to take advantage of Oh My ZSH? And what I often will encourage people to do is like, if you work on a development team with your coworkers, do you all have a lot of things that you end up like things in your documentation? Like here's a bunch of shortcuts for things like that. Create a custom plugin, toss it, like collaborate on that custom plugin, and you can load it in Oh My ZSH, and then you can have that be like a private repository or something, or make it open source, whatever. But that's like a really good way to kind of play around with the tooling as well and create your own theme. And you can add other information like your AWS environments or other fun little details for to distinguish your different projects and stuff like that. So like you could just iterate on a custom theme together and just add some more little juice, fun details that are specific to your company's teams and work environments and stuff like that could be helpful.
So you've also seen a lot of themes. Do you have any like interesting things in your own theme? Like I've tried multiple times to create a Star Trek inspired shell that has like all of the different visualizations, but always just end up stopping because I don't want to create my own terminal font.
My favorite thing to do is to turn on if you set your theme in your config file to random every time you open up a terminal, it's a different theme. It's a good way to that's a good way to live in chaos for a while. But and you can find out what theme it is, and that could be one that you use. I still use mine because I'm lazy. But there's been some fun ones that I've used over the years. I don't remember them off the top of my head. The names, I have to go double check a little bit. But I mean, I know that like was a power level 10K or whatever is like a pretty common one. I'm really envious of what from like just maybe from a monetization perspective, the Dracula theme. I was like, why didn't I think to like package this up into a thing I could just sell and have themes for all these different color palettes. So I don't know, maybe there's going to be a Robby Russell theme one day that for your VS Code you'll pay money for it. But that developer's made way more money than I have with Oh My ZSH, outside of selling stickers and T-shirts and coffee mugs and stuff like that.
Yeah, we actually had him on a little while back. It was a fun story to hear.
Awesome. We just got recently introduced over email. I'm hoping to chat with them a little bit more in the near future as well.
So let's transition over and talk a little bit about what you're doing with Planet Argon. So you kind of talked about this transition of like turning it into an agency that primarily focused on Rails applications. Is that kind of the area that you still find yourself working, or most of your customers doing Rails apps?
Yeah, predominantly, yeah, that's what we're kind of known for. We also work with a couple other technology stacks, like we're doing some stuff with Laravel and React these days, but we used to do stuff with like some other PHP and Python stuff back in the day as well. But Ruby on Rails probably is good 80-ish% of our client base right now. We've been part of the Rails community, as I mentioned, since very early in the Rails community. And at some point there became this pivot of like, rather than companies asking us, hey, would you build this new app for us? It became, hey, we built this app application 2 or 3 years ago with this freelancer and they're no longer available. Can you take over the project? And one of the things I loved about Ruby on Rails was they made all these decisions on before, all the kind of the defaults for a lot of things, and just it's opinionated. And so diving into existing Ruby on Rails applications was like, well, yeah, that's not like things are where they're supposed to be for the most part. And it's just like, how can I focus now less on where things are in the code necessarily, and more about like, how do I understand what their business domain is and like what's important to this company? And also, most importantly, companies that have already built a thing and it's proven to be successful or provides some value to the company, they tend to have budgets. And startups that have an idea for a thing tend to run out of budget, and then they tend to go out of business. So lazily, it became easier to work on kind of pitching ourselves as a company that likes to inherit existing applications and help move them forward. So for a lot of our clients, we take over projects that were developed by another agency, and the agency is really good at spinning up an MVP and keeping it on for a couple of years, but then their team is not excited about maintaining it 3 to 4 years later, and they're like, what do we do? So we pick up projects like that. Or they might have been a company that had 2, 3 full-time internal software engineers work on a project, and then at some point it went down to maybe 1 or 2 people, and then there was this one person on the project for a decade, and they're the only one maintaining it anymore, and then that person misses having other coworkers, and they get a new job, and the company's like, what do we do? All this institution knowledge is going out the door, and we're like, yeah, we can handle that. We can take over your project and keep that going, because maybe they don't want to just hire a replacement for that one person. Because kind of the advice that I give is, if you can't afford to have budget, you don't have enough work for more than say 2 or 3 full-time people, just hire probably a couple of freelancers or outsource that, because you don't, unless that person's like maybe a principal in the company, like a C-level person or one of the founders, like just having an employee be like the one developer sitting in, maybe the corner is a little bit different now than it used to be a decade ago, when it was literally just someone in the corner that nobody knew how to talk to, because that's the software engineer that kept his headphones on and didn't like to talk to people, but they kept the application running. So we took over a lot of those types of projects from companies. And so a lot of our clients were like the primary team working on those projects day to day, making small feature updates, bug fixes, performance improvements, things like that. And then we also do a lot of coaching with helping companies that have their own engineering team on how to like navigate when they've gotten way behind on upgrades, or they've got a bunch of technical debt, or they've had a lot of developer turnover, maybe after layoffs, or just people left, 4 or 5 years ago, and then new people come in and they just are afraid to break things. They're afraid they're going to break things, maybe due to lack of testing or a lot of other things that happen in organizations. So come in and help teams kind of coach them through on how to iterate and improve upon those situations to make their developers' lives a little bit better. So that is quite a bit of what we do. And so, yeah, that's what we do at Planet Argon.
Yeah, it makes sense that Ruby would be a great stack for that sort of work, since there's so much convention by nature in the framework.
Definitely
Yeah.
helps.
So you have a podcast yourself. It's called Maintainable Software, and I want to ask you, what do you think are the keys to creating maintainable software?
Don't write it unless you need to. I think, people, we talk about, maybe your definition of done as as teams. So, hopefully your team, like on anything you're working on for a new feature or on your project, how does your team think about, as we release this thing, what are all the, like, you might have your checklist, like, does it have testing? We could talk about all those different things, but if your team doesn't agree on what those things are, that's usually where things start to erode. Or when you start to be like, unless you have all these like exceptions, like, well, this is an urgent thing, we need to push this out. So I think when that stuff starts to erode, your team's best practices maybe start to get pushed to the side a little bit. And so that can be a challenge. But I think, when it comes to patterns that I've seen, and this regardless of the technical stack, but just, I think, a willingness to speak up and realize that part of our job is to make our the tooling that we're using and how we're exercising our skills as easy for us as possible. And I think what I often see is a lot of developers fall in this habit of like, well, I have to ask for more time to add automated testing. We have to ask for time from, I'm air quoting, the product people to address some technical debt, or to do X, Y, or Z, or to get an upgrade done. And so it becomes now this like us versus them problem, when it's actually more of a company, like, it's your team is slowing down sorry about that. Your team's losing velocity, or however you want to describe efficiency as a development team. And so you make up all these excuses. And so you start pointing the fingers at some other entity. Maybe you've asked, hey, how can we get time to, can I have permission to work on this stuff to address some of these issues? It'll make my life easier. It'll help speed us up in the future. And then they hear not right now many times. And then they stop asking. And the other part of it, and I think that's sad. And so they think that if they just go to another company at some point, maybe the grass will be greener and all these problems will go away. And that's not reality. I think one of the problems we have as an industry is we talk about software development and we frame it around being, hey, we're going to be creating things all the time. We're going to be building new stuff all the time. You're going to, and then I think we do ourselves a disservice as an industry when we don't talk about a lot of software development is actually maintenance work, is iterative improvements of things. It's not as glamorous, but it's important work. And like say it's janitorial work, but I've always thought we've treated ourselves like we're white collar when we're really more of a blue collar industry. And I don't think we should be ashamed of that. And it's like we're doing this magic stuff. Like, no, we're writing code to like business requirements change, and we're going to iterate on things and just keep moving the thing forward as best we can. And I think we have a duty on our end as software engineers to make our lives easier, as I was saying. And we don't always have to ask for permission. Like sometimes you just need to say, this needs to happen in order for this thing to get done. But if you're always offering or we can get it done way faster if we just cut these corners, I think a lot of people don't talk about the corners that they're cutting either. And that's a challenge because they don't know it until they just end up overestimating or underestimating and then kind of like making it up later and like, okay, we'll put that on the backlog and we'll deal with that someday. Does someday ever come is another thing. So I think two things. One, teams need to agree on what definition of done is and what they accept as a team, what their, their principles are. But then also I think it's important to agree on what you consider technical debt as well. I think it's an overused metaphor, and as well, there's some stuff that just needs to happen. And I don't think it's necessarily debt to say like, hey, we need to keep things updated. Otherwise we're not going to be able to ship this because, and another that it's just like this really complicated thing. I get that I host this podcast where I ask people these questions and everybody has a different answer to this. And that's the reason why I have the podcast, because I can have, 200 people come on and say very different things. And that's part of the problem, but also I think reassuring that like, hey, every team is a little bit different and everybody's kind of thinking about this a little bit differently. And so Maintainable software is whatever you think it is and agree on it as whoever the people that are working on that project is. It maybe a short way to answer that question.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with that. I argue that we should upgrade our dependencies a lot more. And I think it all just comes down to technical debt is just communication. Like it's communication between people and deciding upon what that is.
I always think back to, just as a quick small point, is that like when you talk to people in other departments, if someone in accounting decides that they're going to redo some Excel spreadsheets and reformat them and change things to make their life, you think they're asking anyone for permission to do that? They might spend a day or two just taking care of that stuff. No one's questioning their velocity. They're like, no, I needed to do this because the other tool, a spreadsheet, was getting outdated and it was causing some issues and it was slowing us down, or we were losing some information. So I created a new spreadsheet or I revamped it. That person's applauded. Like, why don't we do that more as software engineers? Just like, I did this thing. You don't even have to tell everybody. You just do things and be like, what did you do the last week? I'm like, it's making our tooling better. Like, what the fuck? What's wrong with that? That's my job. You hired me to act in the best interest of the business and software. And if you think I'm not doing a good job of that, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of developers that will just go down rabbit holes and just like go off on little solo missions for too long and not come back very often and report on their progress. And that's a problem. So just don't surprise people, I think is the important thing there. Take away from them.
Yeah, gets back to communication. So to wrap up our episodes, we usually ask a future-facing question. And I've been thinking a little bit about what to ask in this episode. So you've done a lot of work in the terminal, a lot of work on, the environment around Z Shell, and which I hope has given you a lot of really well-formed opinions on this. There are companies who think, oh, the terminal is outdated. It needs to be reinvented. It needs to be modernized. We need to, build it on different technologies or do something different with it. I'm really curious about what you think the future of terminal environments are, if it'll just continue as is, if it'll change in some way, or maybe even things that you would like to see?
It's a good question. I think back, again, earlier I said that like the UX of most shells haven't evolved much in 30 or 40 years. And I think that says something. I think it would be great if shells could do a little bit more from the user experience. And the things that I get a little less excited about is when it's like asking me to log in to a cloud service to use my terminal, because but I could see that I might be thinking about it from an old person's perspective of like, hey, the local shell is my space. I don't need to be on the internet to interact with my computer. Or I don't want to be on an SSH connection and have to, I don't even like, that's even a whole nother thing when you're SSH to a computer or something like that. Set that aside. I think as far as like making the tools more interactive, better autocomplete functionality, like I think I've seen some interesting ideas around, how, maybe using some AI stuff like that, things like that to like, there's even stuff in like the terminal. I use iTerm too, primarily on a Mac, but I'm using a couple of other new terminals. I'm testing it. One of the nice things about having a project like Oh My ZSH is I get asked to check out people's terminal apps way before other people usually release them. So I got to use Fig months before it was released. There was another one, I forgot the name of it, but I'm using a tool called Ghosty right now. And that, I think there's a lot of exciting effects. We're going to get more colors. Maybe you can use your mouse as another thing. Like thinking about how you can use your mouse and a cursor, not always, but could we add some other functionality into that environment? I think that's kind of exciting to think about. Like how could it's funny because it's like we were using mice in DOS games. So it's not like it's this wild, like brand new thing. It just feels like in some ways I think the point and there's something about the interface to a prompt, and I think that's why maybe Chat GPTs and tools like that are like resonating so much right now. It's like you get feedback. You're typing into this thing. Yes, Chat GPT might feel like a very different thing, but it is kind of similar to interacting with your CLI, and you're typing things in. There's patterns for how you do that. There's a syntax to doing it right. And so I think, I think I think that feels like that will be blurry. And I don't know what that's going to look like. What I hope for is that we feel like we're able to type things in and feel pretty confident that we're not going to break our computers, that we're not going to destroy our local environment, or that if we do, it's recoverable. And so I think if there's something about shells and terminals and the tooling to better protect people that are using it and to make it more accessible to even people that are not developers. I was mentioning that conference I went to recently, I spoke at in Berlin, and I was meeting the people that didn't classify themselves as developer, but maybe they worked in like they were data analysts or something, and they knew how to run a bunch of Python stuff, and they were using Oh My ZSH for stuff, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And it's like people outside of what I would, like they're doing coding adjacent things, but they don't identify as coders. What might that look like in another 10 to 15 years where you've got someone in HR that's optimizing their workflow because they can run some really short things and like interact with like a CLI tool that could do some HR related things or like spin up. So I just think like I don't know, maybe that's a crazy example there, but how do we make it more accessible? And then the other hope thing is I just hope things just still remain somewhat delightful and fun, and people can not inject so much. Like when companies are releasing tools, it's not as exciting to me as when it's like a community tool, when there's a little bit more playfulness, a little bit more personality. And you don't see that as often when it comes from, say, a corporate entity. And maybe that's just me with the DIY anarcho thing coming back full circle to being like, let's not make it stuffy. Let's have fun. Let's be playful and a little whimsical.
Yeah, I like how you related or ChatGPT's interface to the terminal. They do feel very similar, even though they're like light years apart. But I could imagine a day where you like, the terminal is essentially a way to ask your computer to do things. If you could ask in a little bit more natural language, and that makes it more accessible to more people, that'd be awesome.
Like build a script to do this, and then it's just like spits it out right there. I'm like, you can do that now with some tools, and which is kind of exciting. I'm not doing that myself, but I'm not ready to have it run the commands myself yet. But think that it's kind of, it's interesting to see how that evolves. So I did not think Oh My ZSH would be this thing 15 years later. I thought this would be a short-lived project, maybe for a few years, and some other cool things would come along and just wipe it, off. Yeah, here we are. So in 15 years, I hope maybe Oh My ZSH is still a thing and it's still evolving. TBD.
Well, it's had a good run so far, and it's got a little momentum, so I'm sure it'll be around.
Well, that's all we have for our questions. Thanks for coming on, Robby. This was a really fun conversation. Like as Justin said, this is one of the first tools I installed on my like journey to becoming a 10x developer, air quotes, where like I've really felt I had control over my tools. So thanks for creating the tool and just like making this community.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Andrew, for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Robby. It's a pleasure to have you on. It's a great tool, and the legacy continues. So we appreciate it.